Sydney's King's Cross. It's the notorious hotspot for drinking and partying. It's a youth magnet every Friday and Saturday night, and has become synonymous with alcohol-fueled violence. Since the death of 2 teenagers at the Cross in 2012, things have changed. These king hits, or cowards punches, have had a devastating impact. So the New South Wales authorities introduced what they called tough new measures.
There will be the introduction of a 1:30 lockout of licensed premises across a new expanded Sydney CBD precinct.
New alcohol laws are now in place. 1:30 a.m. lockouts and 3 a.m. last drinks have been enforced across Sydney's CBD and entertainment precinct. But are lockout laws the solution to curtail violence among young people on our streets? It was trialled in Melbourne, but ditched soon after. In 2008, the Victorian capital introduced a lockout law to ease violence on the streets. But it didn't last very long. So what happened? A KPMG report of the trial found that both assaults reported by police and ambulance trips to hospitals went up before and after the lockout law trials. So while the laws were in place, there was a drop in violence. But alcohol experts say the 3-month trial was seen as a hasty move without public support, although violent offences dropped while they were in place. Nicholas Rees from the University of Melbourne said in a statement, "We had the effectiveness reviewed and it was found assaults reported by police and ambulance trips to hospitals went up just before the lockout laws were enforced and in the period after." Mr. Rees said that although the numbers have dropped, it was clear that Melburnians didn't want the lockout laws. A petition saw 238,000 signatures signed against the laws. Victorian Premier John Brumby dropped the laws in September of 2008. Jessica Enokoma was born in Sydney and moved to Melbourne recently. She says she's glad the lockout laws didn't stick in Melbourne, as they are ruining Sydney's nightlife.
Yeah, it definitely boxes you in. One of the things that happened was me and a girlfriend were there, and it ended up being a lot more guys in the bar at 1:30. So us being the only 2 kind of females where we were sitting, we were targeted by a lot of guys.
According to a recent study done by the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics, since the Sydney lockout laws have been introduced, there's been a 26% drop in assaults in King's Cross and a 36% drop in the CBD. And while those results sound promising, not everyone is cheering. Dr. Don Weatherbourne of St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney said although the new liquor laws in New South Wales appear to have reduced the incidence of assaults, there are some unanswered questions.
But we don't know at what cost to local businesses. We don't know how much of the reductions come about because people are drinking less in King's Cross and how much has come about because people are not going there anymore or not going to the CBD. And this is critical.
In a study done by Victoria Health, alcohol-related hospitalisations in Victoria are 39,000 per year, close to the 48,000 admissions in New South Wales.
Well, we heard a lot of stories about people feeling unsafe, particularly around the King Street area of Melbourne, particularly women, but also men being really frightened about being drawn into violence, and they talked about how they'd do things like not go out with their girlfriends because they wanted to plan their night to avoid the risk of violence.
Nelson Thomas is a 19-year-old student. He knows about alcohol-related assaults all too well. He still remembers his attack.
Me and I think 7 of my friends were at McDonald's just having a good time, really just talking and catching up. And then 2 people who were drunk came in, terrorised the staff, and then we sort of got full force of it. He threw coke at me and my friends, and then he punched me, and they were trying to get into a club and they couldn't get in because it was over past 3 a.m. and a fight broke out then as well, so it could have worked both ways.
Despite being a victim of alcohol-related violence himself, Nelson doesn't believe that locking people in is the only solution. So, what are some of the alternatives? Youth drug and alcohol experts are saying there are more than one contributing reasons as to why young people are getting violent when they drink, and there are other solutions to these problems. Youth Drug and Alcohol Project Manager Dom Ennis says the discussion that needs to be had is much broader than lockout laws.
The availability of alcohol is one key factor in problems relating to alcohol. You know, so if you're measuring whether or not there's more violence or alcohol-related violence in a particular area where there's no longer the same availability of alcohol, you're bound to get a success. When you talk about the issues around drugs and alcohol, on a broader level, lockout laws and such will play one small part. What we tend to find is that for the vast majority of young people that might try or use alcohol will do so without too many problems. But for those that have problems with their drugs or with their alcohol use, there's usually a lot more going on than just whether or not a pub is open till 3 a.m. or not.
So, what would happen if lockout laws were reintroduced in Melbourne?
2 a.m. like seems too early. Yeah, it does.
I think that's a good thing, you know, like keep people in and then that's where they are.
I personally don't really have a problem with it.
So, what is the solution to alcohol-related violence? Well, data shows that lockout laws reduce alcohol-related violence in Sydney, but experts still believe that it's too soon to say whether or not those lockout laws are the only solution to a much broader problem.
It's not about saying lockout laws are bad, it's just by saying there's no, usually with anything, so say for instance a good example would be over the last 25 years we've had a massive reduction in how many people smoke cigarettes, as an example, but it wasn't one thing that did that.
The discussion that needs to be had in Melbourne is one of serious urgency. Zena Chamas, Melbourne.